Imagine trusting someone enough to share your home, only to find out that person is hiding a chilling dark side. These are two horrifying true stories of roommates whose innocent facades concealed terrifying intentions. Join me as we unravel the nightmare lurking within the ordinary, where trust and safety turned into danger and fear. Buckle up. This isn't just another scary story. It's a reminder that sometimes the real horror lives right next to us. Katarina moved to a new city with the usual excitement of any young university student, eager to start a fresh chapter of independence and adventure. She was ready to embrace the unknown, make new friends, and experience a life unbounded by the comfort and familiarity of her hometown. Upon her arrival, she was assigned a roommate, a young woman named Aubrey, who at first seemed nothing short of perfect. Aubrey had the kind of vibrant energy that could light up any room. Her laugh was infectious, her smile wide and genuine, and her personality immediately put Katarina at ease. In the first few weeks, they hit it off like long-lost friends. They spent evenings sharing stories about their pasts, their hopes, and their dreams. They bonded over their mutual love for cooking, late-night movies, and cozy wine nights on the couch. Katarina felt that she had found not just a roommate, but a friend, maybe even a sister. Aubrey's friendly demeanor and warm-hearted gestures made Katarina feel like she was in a safe space, away from the anxieties and pressures of a new city. Aubrey had a boyfriend named Nick, who seemed just as charming as she was. Nick visited often, and soon he too became a fixture in their daily lives. He would bring over takeout on nights when no one felt like cooking, introduce Katarina to new shows, and share stories that made them laugh until their sides hurt. It was the perfect living arrangement, or so Katarina thought. Beneath the warmth and camaraderie, something far darker lay hidden, a truth that would soon shatter the illusion of safety and comfort that Katarina had built around herself. Over time, Katarina began to notice small, unsettling details about Aubrey. Aubrey would sometimes ask Katarina strange, almost intrusive questions that seemed innocent on the surface, but hinted at a deeper, almost predatory curiosity. She would ask Katarina about her fears, her past relationships, her most personal insecurities. These weren't the typical questions one would expect from a friend. They felt probing, as if Aubrey were trying to uncover hidden vulnerabilities. But Katarina, not wanting to seem distrustful or rude, brushed it off, assuming it was just Aubrey's way of getting to know her better. As their friendship deepened, Aubrey's behavior became more peculiar. She developed a habit of borrowing Katarina's belongings without asking. At first, it was small things, a favorite sweater, a pair of earrings, a hairbrush. But soon, her borrowing escalated. Katarina would often find her clothes strewn around the apartment, her jewelry misplaced, her books with pages bent or missing. When she confronted Aubrey, she would laugh it off, dismissing it as a misunderstanding. But each time, Katarina felt a small, inexplicable twinge of discomfort, a whisper of unease that she couldn't quite shake. The turning point came on a chilly autumn evening. Aubrey suggested they have a cozy night in, just the two of them, with sushi and wine, a perfect way to unwind after a stressful week. Katarina eagerly agreed, grateful for the chance to relax with her friend. But just as they were settling in, Aubrey received a message from Nick and, in a sudden change of plans, announced that she had to leave. Katarina was slightly disappointed, but decided to carry on with the evening alone. She poured herself a glass of wine, took a bite of her sushi, and settled into the couch with her favorite show. But as she took her first sip of wine, she noticed a strange metallic taste. She paused, thinking perhaps the wine had gone bad or was mixed with something off. She took another cautious sip, and the taste lingered, slightly bitter and unsettling. She brushed it off, assuming it was nothing, but soon after, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Her limbs grew heavy, her mind clouded, and an intense sense of confusion overwhelmed her. It was as if a fog had descended over her thoughts, making it difficult to focus. Her vision blurred, and her surroundings seemed to shift and sway as if she were underwater. Panic began to set in as she tried to make sense of what was happening. She stumbled to her feet, each step feeling like a monumental effort, and made her way to her bedroom, hoping that lying down would help ease the symptoms. But as she lay there, fighting to stay awake, she heard faint voices outside her door, Aubrey and Nick, whispering in low, hurried tones. Her heart began to race as she strained to listen, catching fragments of their conversation. "Do you think she drank enough?" Aubrey's voice was filled with an unsettling mixture of excitement and nervousness. Nick's response was chilling. She should be out for the night. The horrifying realization dawned on Katarina. She had been drugged. The people she trusted most had betrayed her in the most sinister way. A cold wave of terror washed over her, and every fiber of her being screamed for her to get up, to run. But her body was heavy, immobilized by whatever they had put in her drink. Her mind raced, desperately trying to formulate a plan, but she was trapped, powerless to escape. The doorknob slowly turned, and Katarina's breath caught in her throat. She forced herself to remain still, feigning unconsciousness as she heard the creak of the door opening. Through her half-closed eyes, she could see Nick's silhouette standing in the doorway, his gaze cold and calculating as he surveyed her prone form. Behind him, Aubrey's face was twisted in an expression of dark anticipation, a look that bore no resemblance to the friendly roommate Katarina thought she knew. They stood there, watching her with an almost clinical detachment, as if she were nothing more than an object in their twisted game. Katarina lay still, her mind racing as she tried to stay calm. She knew that any movement, any indication that she was awake, could trigger them to act. So she focused on her breathing, trying to keep it slow and steady, willing herself to appear as if she were in a deep, drugged sleep. After a few agonizing moments, Nick turned to Aubrey, muttering something that Katarina couldn't make out. They both exchanged a final glance before quietly closing the door behind them. The sound of the door clicking shut was both a relief and a new source of fear. She was alone, but trapped in a room with no way out. As their footsteps faded, Katarina lay there, her heart pounding so loudly that she feared they would hear it. She knew that whatever they had planned was only temporarily on hold. She was living on borrowed time, and if she didn't act fast, she might not get another chance. Summoning the last reserves of her strength, she reached for her phone, her fingers shaking as she typed a hurried message to her closest friend. "Something's wrong. Please come quickly." Her friend responded immediately, sensing the urgency in her tone, and promised to come as fast as possible. Katarina clung to that hope, praying that she could hold on until help arrived. But the wait felt endless, every second stretching into an eternity. Each creak, each distant sound seemed magnified, as if the apartment itself were a living entity, echoing her fear back to her. She could feel the walls closing in, the darkness pressing down, a suffocating weight that threatened to consume her. Finally, a soft knock broke the silence, and Katarina's heart leaped. Her friend had arrived, and she forced herself to get up, each step a Herculean effort. Her friend took one look at her pale, trembling form and knew that something was terribly wrong. Without a word, they guided her out of the apartment, holding her up as they made their way to safety. Once they reached the sanctuary of a nearby hotel, Katarina collapsed onto the bed, her body still weak, but her mind finally free from the suffocating fear that had gripped her. Her friend sat beside her, waiting patiently as she recounted the nightmare she had just endured. Katarina's voice shook as she described the betrayal, the fear, the chilling realization of what her closest friends had planned. The following morning, Katarina returned to the apartment with police officers, determined to find evidence and bring Aubrey and Nick to justice. But as they entered, her heart sank. The wine bottle was gone, and every trace of their actions meticulously erased. Without concrete evidence, the police explained, there was little they could do. Katarina felt a wave of helplessness wash over her, realizing that Aubrey and Nick would walk away free, leaving her to carry the weight of their betrayal alone. The days that followed were a blur of fear and confusion. Katarina moved out, leaving behind the apartment that had once been her sanctuary but had turned into a prison. But no matter how far she went, the trauma lingered, casting a shadow over every aspect of her life. Each creak of the floor, each unexpected noise in the night, sent her heart racing, a constant reminder of the terror she had narrowly escaped. If this story has you gripping your seat, hit that like button and share it with anyone who loves a good, spine-tingling tale. Let's see who's brave enough to continue this dark journey. Katarina lay motionless on her bed, her body paralyzed with fear and confusion, but her mind was racing. The effects of whatever drug they had given her were still coursing through her system, making it difficult to move, think, or even breathe properly. She knew she had to act fast, but her limbs felt like they were weighed down by heavy chains. Her phone lay on the bedside table, just out of reach, and every second that ticked by filled her with an increasing sense of desperation. The sounds of footsteps outside her room sent a jolt of terror through her body. She forced herself to lie still, slowing her breathing and closing her eyes, just enough to maintain the appearance of unconsciousness. She felt like a trapped animal, lying in wait, pretending to be dead to avoid the predators lurking nearby. But in her mind, she was anything but still. Every nerve in her body was screaming for her to do something, to escape, to survive. The weight of the fear pressing down on her was suffocating. She thought about the moments leading up to this nightmare, how she had trusted Aubrey implicitly, how she had allowed herself to believe that she was safe in her own home. The betrayal cut deep, leaving an emotional wound that felt as raw and painful as any physical injury. It wasn't just her body that was trapped. It was her very sense of security, her belief in human kindness that had been shattered. With every ounce of strength she could muster, Katarina managed to inch her hand toward her phone. The movement was agonizingly slow, each inch feeling like a mile, but eventually her fingers closed around it. She unlocked the screen, her vision still blurry, her fingers trembling as she typed a short, desperate message to her best friend. "Something's wrong. Please come. Now." Her friend's response was almost immediate, a simple, "On my way." The two words brought a glimmer of hope to Katarina's heart, but the fear didn't dissipate. She was still trapped, still vulnerable, and the realization that help was on the way did little to alleviate the gnawing terror that filled her. The weight was excruciating. Katarina lay there, every sound amplified, every shadow in the room seeming to shift and morph into sinister shapes. Her senses were heightened, her mind filled with images of what could happen if Aubrey and Nick returned. She could almost hear the soft rustle of footsteps outside her door, the faint whispers of their voices plotting and planning. Her imagination conjured up all sorts of horrors, each one worse than the last, each one a reminder of how helpless she was. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard a knock at the door. Her friend had arrived, and Katarina felt a rush of relief, tempered by the lingering effects of the drug and the deep-seated fear that had taken root in her heart. She forced herself to get up, her body feeling like it was moving through molasses, each step a Herculean effort. Her friend took one look at her pale, disheveled appearance and knew something was horribly wrong. Without a word, they guided her out of the apartment, holding her up as they made their way down the hall and out into the night. The The cold air hit her like a splash of water, jolting her senses back to some semblance of clarity. The world outside felt surreal, as if she were walking through a dream, each step taking her further from the nightmare that had unfolded in her own home. Once they reached the safety of a nearby hotel, Katarina collapsed onto the bed, her body still weak and unsteady, but her mind finally free from the suffocating grip of fear. She lay there, breathing deeply, her heart pounding as she processed the events of the past few hours. Her friend sat beside her, offering silent support, their presence a reassuring anchor in a world that suddenly felt unstable and unpredictable. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Katarina felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Her body ached, her head throbbed, and her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: fear, anger, betrayal, and a lingering sense of disbelief. How could this have happened? How could she have been so blind to the true nature of the people she had trusted with her safety? The hours passed in a blur of fitful sleep and waking nightmares. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Aubrey and Nick standing over her, their faces twisted into expressions of malice and cruelty. She could still hear their whispered voices, still feel the weight of their gaze on her as they assessed her vulnerability. The fear was ingrained in her now, a permanent scar that would never fully heal. When the first light of dawn broke through the window, Katarina knew what she had to do. She had to return to the apartment, to face the scene of the nightmare, and confront the reality of what had happened. She called the police, explaining the situation in halting, shaky sentences. The officers arrived at the hotel and escorted her back to the apartment, their presence a reassuring shield against the lingering shadows of fear. But as they entered the apartment, Katarina felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. The wine bottle was gone, and every trace of the night's events had been meticulously erased. It was as if Aubrey and Nick had anticipated her move, cleaning up all evidence of their actions. The officers searched the apartment thoroughly, but without concrete proof, there was little they could do. Katarina felt a wave of helplessness wash over her, a sense of defeat that left her feeling hollow and broken. In the days that followed, Katarina struggled to come to terms with what had happened. She moved out of the apartment, leaving behind the place that had once felt like a sanctuary, but had turned into a prison. But no matter how far she went, the trauma lingered, casting a shadow over every aspect of her life. Each creak of the floor, each unexpected noise in the night, sent her heart racing, a constant reminder of the terror she had narrowly escaped. Her new apartment was quiet, almost eerily so, and she found herself jumping at every little sound. The once comforting silence now felt oppressive, a reminder of the moments she had spent lying in bed, paralyzed and helpless, listening to the whispers outside her door. She developed a hyper-awareness of her surroundings, her senses on constant high alert, as if she were always waiting for something terrible to happen. Sleep became a rare and elusive comfort. Each night, as she lay in bed, her mind would replay the events of that fateful night, filling her with a creeping sense of dread. The memory of Aubrey's face, twisted into an expression of dark anticipation, haunted her. She could still see Nick's calculating gaze, still feel the cold weight of their betrayal pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. Katarina knew that she would never be the same. The experience had left an indelible mark on her psyche, a permanent reminder of the fragility of trust and the dangers that lurk behind friendly faces. She found herself withdrawing from people, building walls around her heart, afraid to let anyone get too close. The world felt darker, more dangerous, a place where evil could hide in plain sight, wearing the mask of friendship. What would you have done in Katarina's situation? Comment below on how you'd handle such a nightmare scenario, and don't forget to share if you found this story as haunting as we did. After escaping the immediate threat, Katarina tried to rebuild her life in a new apartment, but she found herself haunted by the memories of that night. The betrayal, the fear, and the helplessness she'd felt all lingered like a dark shadow over her every thought. She'd once been optimistic, trusting, and open-hearted, but now she felt as though a part of her had been irrevocably changed, hardened by the trauma she'd experienced. Her new apartment was in a quiet part of town, a place where she hoped she could find some peace and safety. But even in this seemingly tranquil setting, the scars of her encounter with Aubrey and Nick were ever present. Katarina developed a hyper-awareness of her surroundings, a heightened sensitivity to every sound, every flicker of movement, as though her mind was perpetually on high alert. Each night as she lay in bed, she could feel the tension winding through her body, her senses tuned to the slightest hint of danger. Her new roommate, Sarah, was a quiet, unassuming girl who seemed to respect Katarina's space and boundaries. They barely interacted beyond polite greetings, and Katarina was relieved. She had no interest in forming close relationships or allowing anyone into her life again. The experience with Aubrey had shattered her trust, leaving her with walls that felt impenetrable. In her mind, opening up to someone else meant exposing herself to potential danger, and she wasn't willing to take that risk. But the peace Katarina sought remained elusive. Despite the quiet surroundings and Sarah's respectful distance, Katarina couldn't shake the feeling that she was constantly being watched. Every time she walked through the hallways, she felt as though unseen eyes were following her, assessing her, waiting for her to let her guard down. Shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, shifting and stretching in the corners of her vision, filling her with a gnawing sense of unease. Sleep became a luxury, something she could only attain in short bursts. Each time she closed her eyes, the memories of that night came rushing back. The whispers outside her door, the metallic taste of the drugged wine, and the chilling realization that the people she trusted had plotted against her. She'd wake up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, her body tense as if she were still trapped in that apartment, listening to the footsteps of her betrayers outside her door. Months passed, and Katarina tried her best to adapt, but the fear lingered. She found herself changing her routines, avoiding familiar places, and keeping to herself. Her social life dwindled, and she began to withdraw from her friends, unable to explain the depth of the trauma she was carrying. She felt as though she were living in a world apart from everyone else, a world defined by shadows and fear, where the line between reality and nightmare had blurred. The paranoia that had taken root in her mind grew stronger with each passing day. Katarina started installing additional locks on her doors, triple-checking them every night before going to bed. She kept a weapon, a heavy metal flashlight, by her bedside within easy reach. Every sound in the night, every creak of the floorboards, sent her heart racing, her mind spiraling into thoughts of intruders and unseen threats. The world outside her apartment became a place of danger, a place she avoided whenever possible. The trauma began to affect her physical health as well. Her appetite dwindled, and she lost weight. Dark circles formed under her eyes, a constant reminder of her sleepless nights. She became jumpy, easily startled by sudden movements or loud noises, and the slightest hint of confrontation sent her into a state of panic. Her friends, concerned for her well-being, tried to reach out, but Katarina pushed them away, unwilling to let anyone back into her life. One night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Katarina felt an overwhelming wave of loneliness wash over her. She realized that she had become a prisoner of her own fear, trapped in an endless cycle of anxiety and isolation. The walls she had built to protect herself had become a cage, cutting her off from the world and leaving her vulnerable to the very thing she was trying to escape, her own mind. In an attempt to regain some control, Katarina started seeing a therapist, hoping that talking about her experiences would help her find some semblance of peace. She began to unpack the events of that night, reliving the terror and betrayal in a safe, controlled environment. The therapist helped her understand that her hypervigilance, her mistrust, and her paranoia were all natural responses to trauma, but that they didn't have to define her life. Gradually, Katarina started to make small changes. She forced herself to go out more, to interact with people, to try and rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It was a slow, painful process, and there were days when the fear threatened to overwhelm her. But with each step forward, she felt a small sense of victory, a tiny spark of hope that perhaps one day she could put the past behind her. Yet, despite her efforts, there were moments when the darkness would creep back in, casting a shadow over her progress. She would catch a glimpse of herself in the mirror and see a stranger staring back, a person haunted by memories that refused to fade, by a betrayal that had left scars too deep to heal. She knew that the fear would always be a part of her, a quiet presence lurking in the background, but she was determined not to let it consume her. Katarina's journey was far from over. She understood that recovery was not a destination, but a continuous process, a series of choices she would have to make every day. She had to choose to trust, to open herself up to the possibility of connection, to believe that not everyone held darkness within them. It was a fragile hope, one that could easily be shattered, but it was all she had. As she stood by the window one evening, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Katarina allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had survived a nightmare, a betrayal that could have broken her, but she was still standing. She was scarred, yes, but those scars were a testament to her strength, a reminder that she had faced the darkness and come out the other side. For the first time in months, Katarina felt a sense of peace. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was real. She took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs, and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew that she still had a long way to go, that there would be days when the fear would return, when the memories would claw their way back into her mind. But in that moment, she chose to believe that she could find happiness again, that she could rebuild the life that had been taken from her. Katarina turned away from the window, her gaze steady, her heart filled with a quiet determination. She was ready to face whatever came next, to confront the shadows that lingered in her mind, and to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. She had faced the darkness and survived. Now it was time to step back into the light. If you found Katarina's story as unsettling as we did, don't forget to subscribe to Nightmare Narratives for more spine-chilling tales like this one. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that might keep you up at night. Remember, sometimes the true horror lies not in haunted houses or ghosts, but in the betrayals that come from those we trust most.